When I was in prayer this morning, I heard the Lord tell me to turn to John 6, verse 48. And then directly after I heard that verse, I heard Him say 58. So, I turned to John 6, verse 48, and it says, when this is Jesus talking, He says, I am the true bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the desert and died. And directly across from it in my Bible, you can see it's directly across from it, is verse 58. And Jesus says the same exact words, but He says them kind of opposite of each other. He says, I am not like the bread your ancestors ate and later died. I am the living bread that comes from heaven. And He goes on to expound upon this more here. He says, eat this bread and you will live forever. And I could tell when He spoke that to me, He was trying to correlate something that I don't think I would have normally seen. And He says two things here. He says, I am the bread of life. In both verses He says it, but He says it secondly in verse 58. In verse 58, He tells them first that I am not like the bread your ancestors ate and later died. And the reason I believe that Jesus was using the word died after they ate the manna in the desert is He's trying to get across the point that when you truly eat of me, which He expounds upon more in verse 58, you will live. But when you eat the bread of old, the bread that is not of me, and not saying that the manna wasn't given from God, but God told them in the Old Testament that you must eat it only this day, and you must not gather it up for the next day, for it will be no good. But Jesus says, when you eat of me, you will not die, but you will live. And what He was saying is the bread that God gave them for food did not sustain them in the sense of living and not complaining. You see, the people in the desert, the Israelites in the desert, they, although were given manna from God Himself, continued to complain, ended up complaining about the manna after so many days, so long of eating this. They began to complain that they were tired of eating the bread, even though God was so merciful upon them to feed them when they had nothing to eat. They still found reason to make complaint about the food that was given to them from God. But Jesus is saying that when you truly eat of me, you will live. You see, there's nothing that we could partake of Jesus Himself that could ever make us die if we are only partaking of Him. And I think what the Lord was really trying to correlate this to me is that we have to get to a place that we quit partaking of bread that grows old, that we quit partaking of things, and even of the things that God gives us. You see, we are so worried about consuming the things that God can give us that we're ignoring the fact that we must consume Jesus every day in order to live. You see, we are trying to live by the blessings that we can get from God and the things that we can obtain from God and the things that we can obtain from the person of Jesus Christ instead of obtaining Him Himself. And this is what I believe even the Israelites themselves missed in what God was speaking through providing food for them is, and I think it correlated totally in the future when Jesus was speaking, but they were missing the fact that God Himself was providing for them so that they could live and not die. But instead of realizing that without God, I would be starving to death. Without God, I would not be alive right now. They grew tired of eating something that produced pretty much out of nothing every morning for them. That they did not have to look for food, they did not have to search for food. It was already provided for them. And in the New Testament, Jesus reveals this in the same way, but in the sense of, I never grow old, and this new fresh bread that I give you will give you life eternally. But Jesus says this earlier in John 6 that we must come to Him every day to partake of Him. If you go to Matthew chapter 6, when the disciples ask Jesus how to pray, Jesus says, pray like this, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Then He says this, give us this day our daily bread. And then I think sometimes when we read that, we don't actually see that when Jesus is talking about Himself here, when He says, give us this day our daily bread, that means give us this day Jesus. May we come to Jesus and partake of Him, our living bread today. Jesus was talking about Himself, which He reveals here in John, about Him being the living bread. That in this prayer, Jesus is talking of Himself. Give us this day, Jesus, that we may partake of Him, for in Him is life. And so, what the Lord was talking to me here, and what He is talking about with the bread that our ancestors died, we need to quit going back, first of all, and eating out of the same place that our ancestors ate of, which a lot of times falls into religion. That we go back and eat things of the past instead of eating what's made new for us every day, which is Jesus Christ, so that we may come and partake of Jesus every single day. That we are not looking for what He can give us, for what He can offer us, which even the things He can give us, when we put them before God, will eventually fade away, and it cannot sustain, it cannot satisfy above the person of who Jesus Christ is. So Jesus is saying, partake of me, and only me. May you come to me every day and partake of me. He says, here He's saying, I am the life. In me you will find life as you partake of me. So as we come to Jesus every day, may we come with this one desire. Lord, may I eat of you today, because if I do not eat of you, Lord, I am lifeless. Without you, Lord, I will produce nothing but failure. I will produce nothing but things that will continually fall short, that things will continually lead me down paths that you are not in or of. But Lord, when I partake of you, I am filled with life, and life overflowing. So may we partake of Him every day, and may we make Him the bread of our partaking, the bread of our eating, the bread of our supping. May we sit down with Him and dine with Him and eat of Him and Him only. Love you guys.